Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another walkthrough here of a couple of digital marketing topics. Today, we're going to go through two topics in particular. We have online reputation management and mobile marketing. Please excuse me ahead of time. I am fighting through a cold right now, so if you hear me with the sniffles or a cough or anything, I'll try to mute the mic when I do that. But just wanted to give you a quick heads up before we begin. And we'll start. I already have the slides pulled up here. I have pulled out the relevant slides for this week. Between the two chapters, I think I have 11 in total. So there's not many, but we're going to go through the big topics. These are also covered on the cover page for the Canvas site for the week. And I just want to go through the two topics at a high level, as the textbook largely does, but also just keeping in mind that these are fairly important topics, very relevant for businesses today. I would say there is a lot of money to be gained or lost, I would say, actually, in both of these areas. Online reputation management, you see a lot of lawsuits popping up these days between businesses and consumers, one way or the other, where you see suits for defamation, libel, and a lot of the ideas behind this is that are kind of they originate from the idea that online reviews can legitimately tarnish a company's reputation, their revenue streams, and could ultimately, if there's enough movement behind, say, a negative review, could actually lead to a company going completely out of business. I'm witnessing one here, just here out in the burbs where I live, where I'm seeing a company that's been handling some poor Facebook posts really poorly, and they just opened for the summer. It's a ice cream place, and it's amazing how the community has rallied essentially against these people. Obviously, there's people on both sides, but it'll be interesting to see how the business does this summer, because it's really a great case study to see what one Facebook post can do to impact a company's revenue, a small business in particular. The examples I have here in the slides, or I don't have any in these slides and I'm going to show you, but the examples that you'll see in the slides, specifically the Taco Bell example, that's a big corporate response, but it is a good template for just companies in general. It's a good PR move overall. And we'll, again, I'm not going to go through that example specifically, but I will go through the 3 T's of emergency response. So starting here with, there's 3 areas for ORM, online reputation management. 3 areas that will be covered here. There's monitoring your reputation. There is responding to a negative response, or there's responding to a negative post or article or claim. And then there is how to mitigate them in the future. And it's really fairly straightforward, but if you understand what those are, that'll really help kind of get you through the rest of the chapter. If you had to boil it down to that, I mean, it's really not that many terms here. But we start here with Google Alerts. You may or may not have heard of Google Alerts before. They've been around for a long time, but they've also kind of gone out of style recently. There's a lot of other sites out there that are honestly better than Google Alerts, but it's a good foundation when it comes to monitoring a brand or a person. All you have to do is create an alert about literally anything you want. I have one for myself, for example, and anytime that there's a new iteration of that keyword phrase on the internet, you will get an alert about it. Google Alerts offer a couple different of alert methods or frequencies. I have mine set on as it happens, so that as soon as Google sees it, it will send me an email. You can also set it to be daily, weekly, monthly, various timing intervals. Now, the downside to this, as you may have learned, as you may recall from the SEO chapter, is that Google doesn't actually see a web page until they crawl it, until they index it. And that doesn't usually happen automatically. That's usually something that occurs, I don't know, every week, 2 weeks or so. And there was a new movement out about how companies can kind of handle this on their own for Google and submit a crawl to a search engine like Google, so you don't have to just request one and wait a bunch of time. But the moral of the story here with Google Alerts is that it's not the fastest response. It'll definitely catch almost everything, but first off, it's not going to get you the response you're looking for immediately. So if there's a crisis and somebody posts something terrible, like a blog post about your company, you're probably not going to find out about it immediately through Google Alerts. You're probably actually going to learn about it through other means beforehand. It'll probably be a couple of days. On the other hand, you need to be very specific with what you are putting in that create an alert about box, just because you're going to end up getting a lot more than what you're actually looking for. I remember I had a keyword term that I was looking for, and it was a brand. The brand is called Mish Auto, one word. But the problem is I didn't put any actual limiters or anything around it. So Google found everything that was spelled like that, and it ended up bringing over all sorts of articles where a writer would shorten the state Michigan to Mich, M-I-C-H, dot, and then a space, and then like automotive or auto companies, anything with those first four letters. You know, it was I believe it's a pretty basic search engine when it comes to Google Alerts. So you do need to put some identifiers around it. Having said that, there is a question on the quiz specifically about that, just to give you a heads up. It's going to be, it's not super ridiculous, but it's about monitoring alerts for a business, and then plus another term being like the type of crisis that it is. I believe it's Apple and fraud. And so the idea is that you want to be sure to actively monitor crucial alerts for something like Apple plus fraud, and Apple plus scam, rather than just, if you have a Google alert for the word Apple, you're in for a lot of emails with a lot of alerts really fast. So that's the idea behind the Google alerts. The other thing, though, is to also watch the search engine results pages. Really just the first couple, based on what we've talked about here in the course. Nobody's going to see anything that's too far down. But when you look at the SERPs, you're going to get the news articles, like what you see with the Richard Branson example here. With Google now, you'll see products. You could see reviews, average scores, a Wikipedia page. All of those are very, what's the word? They can all be updated really fast. Things can change really quickly, not just based on one post, but on a series of results and responses. And the idea is that you don't need to watch your SERPs every day, but you should watch them fairly regularly to make sure that your brand is not portrayed in a largely negative light up front. Now, there are a bunch of different types of sites to monitor. I'm not going to ask you about all of these. But generally, when you join a company, they're already going to know what to look for. For example, activist organizations, you don't have to monitor them all. You're going to be looking for the one that specifically relates and works with the industry that you're in, or the products that you deal with, or the people. You're going to know up front, or the people in your business will know up front, who to be on the lookout for when it comes to anything that could impact your ORM. That could be positive, that could be negative. But the idea is that online review sites, social media sites, blogs, those are the big things. Press releases, those are the common ones that everybody will know. The idea, though, is that you need to know where else things could come from. And that is where you think about your competitors, businesses that might have something ethically against you, whatever the reason that is, be good or bad. If you're on the lookout for the brand, you need to know about all the different directions that these different pieces of content can come at you from. And that is why you have all these different types of sites to monitor. Again, it's really, if anything, you want to know specifically where the reputation attacks can come from, and keep an eye on those, rather than sit back and passively wait for a Google alert to hit your desk. But now let's move on to the next piece. This is the response. So say there is a really nasty review out about your business and a bunch of other people have piled on and said, oh yeah, I know who that is. That's terrible. No, I agree. This is awful. We should all boycott them. Awful. Uh, and that all, let's say that all happens quickly. Honestly, it's time to implement the 3 T's of ORM emergency response. Timeliness, transparency, and training. Timeliness means be fast. The quicker you can respond to something, the lesser of an opportunity the initial negativity will have to grow and to fester into more of a group think, more of a large scale negative thought process. You want to avoid that as much as possible. As soon as you see it, whether you get it from an alert or you hear it from somebody else or you see it yourself, you need to respond immediately. But that's not to say you should do it just like on a whim. Like you do still want to think through your response. And when you do that, you need to make sure that you're transparent about what's happening. You don't want to you don't want to say anything that's not true. But at the same time, you want to be sure that you are also thinking about what specifically you want to say about the matter and making sure that it is that you're accurate in what it is that you're saying and how you're articulating. And the idea behind that is that you don't want to. I mean, publicists will know more about this than somebody like me. But my thought here is that you definitely want to be able to spend a couple of lines talking about, okay, this is the situation, this is what happened. If it's something that your company did that was actually like bad and you're going to take responsibility for it, you want to also respond and say what you're doing in regards to that and how you're going to fix it. If it's something that you are going to deny, then you want to make sure that you have all of your points clearly laid out, why you're denying it, what the actual facts are around it, and making sure that your legal team is also involved. This is not something that somebody right out of undergrad is probably going to be tasked with handling, but it is something that you are going to need to be ready to address. And if you see something, say you're monitoring social media accounts and you see a really nasty post about something and it's patently false, you want to be sure to just escalate that quickly and make sure that it gets handled quickly rather than being the person to just jump in and respond, because that could go poorly for you for sure. Additionally, you have your third step, which is training. Training is the idea that you essentially what I just said is that you as an employee know what to do, not just in an emergency response, but in any situation where something could go wrong. There's more details about this later in the textbook itself, but training is also something that is often referenced when a company does something bad, does something poorly, takes fault, admits guilt. But usually the first thing they say is like, hey, we admit, we were wrong in this situation. We will make sure that the employees that did whatever it is, that they are provided the adequate training so that they are better equipped to respect and respond to these situations in the future. Training is often a thing. Sensitivity training when it's a human interaction thing. More actual job skills training. Maybe the food is undercooked or something, or not cooked at all. Making sure that they know what they're doing on the job. A lot of times, companies chalk it up to training. Now, having said that, just in general, the idea of training here in the ORM model, that's something that you really are just going to want to be sure that it's addressed in the response and making sure that essentially this doesn't happen again. So finally, we have the third part, which is how to mitigate these things in the future, how to stop a negative review from really gaining ground, and also how to avoid negative press from being on the first page of Google when somebody Googles you. There's a couple different types of content that rank really well. Pretty much anything that lives on your company website due to the strong SEO that it has. Things like your corporate blog. You have examples of the different airlines here. Your website in general, because it should rank first organically. Maybe Wikipedia will beat you, but probably not. Then you have your corporate videos. Yes. YouTube videos are also always going to rank the highest on Google, obviously, because Google owns them when it comes to other videos. So making sure that you have the different types of, different types of different areas of content that Google's going to naturally rank highly, including video. Having a YouTube channel is going to help because it's going to be ranking pretty highly. People might click through, check out what kind of videos you have. And then from there, you can really do a good job of managing the message and saying what you want so that people get your side of the story first and maybe just at all. Sometimes social media will rank well. Honestly, I think it almost always does well. I don't know why the book says sometimes. If your social media presence is really poor, maybe it'll rank bad. But as long as there's a consistent strategy behind it and you've been following the goals based on earlier in the semester, like we talked about, generally it's going to rank pretty highly, especially if they are verified accounts. Then there's also these company directories. You have your local chamber of commerce. You have job sites like Indeed, LinkedIn. There's also a social network. Those are always going to rank pretty highly too. So if you maintain those and you actually utilize them, you should be able to handle most of the first page of Google. Now, obviously, that doesn't handle the news section, which we're not going to really get into here in this course. But in terms of just organic SERP results, these should be good for you. And now we have the second chapter of the week, which is mobile marketing. Excuse me for 1 second. All right. Only a couple of slides here for mobile marketing. So the last chapter is all about ORM, online reputation. Honestly, ORM is largely handled through mobile devices these days. You have a lot of online e-commerce, a lot of information searching for a new brand, new retail, something new that you've learned about. That happens on a phone, not as much on a desktop. But there are some constraints to mobile devices, which some actually would consider not just constraints, but strengths. First off, the phone graphic in this picture is not accurate. It's actually 320 pixels across, not 720. The minimum mobile devices that are really, designed for the web, it starts at 320 pixels, not 720. Just to put that out there, set the record straight. But the idea is that on mobile, you have less information. It takes a lot longer for people to type. The internet's going to be slower because a lot of times you're on your data. But then also, you scroll a lot faster. That's going to be a quiz question there. And being able to quickly scroll. I mean, you think about how fast you scroll through social media on a regular basis and on a website. That's really a big positive or negative to mobile marketing in general. You have fat finger clicking and slower processor, but those are kind of less of a concern these days. This book was last updated almost 2 years ago. So I don't consider those to be big issues, and I don't think you're going to see it in any sort of assessment here. But a couple of things that I did want to talk about in mobile marketing are the advantages of mobile marketing and how it can be used for good for a brand. You have location based. I mean, we all have gone through that time when you look at a web page on your phone and then you get an alert that says, hey, whatever website wants to use your location, and you either accept or deny. If you accept it, you're going to be able to get a more personalized experience than if you don't. But also, if you don't, then obviously you have more privacy and you're a little bit, safer, protected. And that's really the idea that when you're looking at location-based targeting, when you say yes, for example, you are then offering you're offering the brand to deliver you more of their stuff, more offers, more ads, a more personalized web-based experience. Now, in addition to that, you also have the idea of the mobile website. I think we all know what that is. Difference between Best Buy desktop site, Best Buy mobile site. There's way less information here, than there is here. And websites now, as you may recall from earlier chapters, I mean, they are designed for mobile first. And that is the idea of when I lay out my website, I'm going to look at how it's going to be on mobile devices. And then, secondly, I'm going to lay out a wider desktop experience like we have here. Now, when I say that, the first time I learned about that, I thought, okay, that doesn't seem right. Like I've never seen that. And I work with a lot of different web developers on a lot of different projects. But now you can tell these days it's quite obvious that, you know, websites that start at this, that start with a desktop, that then go down to mobile, you're going to find the mobile experience being, I guess we could say, a it just seems like a smaller percentage of the stuff on desktop where it's like, okay, like here, like, okay, there's clearly a photo, like this website's actually pretty good, but like a website that is not designed for mobile first is going to have a little bit of a different look and feel because you might have photos that are poorly cropped. You might have a strange flow of information and text, and you may not actually have the proper hierarchy. If you were to scroll down on this page, you're going to get all these different sections of the Best Buy website, and they're going to be ranked by importance because they know that people don't usually make it all the way to the footer. Now, with a mobile first website, you have it differently where you'd be looking at it and say, okay, what do we want to put first? Do we go sectionally? Maybe not. Maybe we just actually put all the most relevant information at the top and then provide more of a natural flow of information going down as you scroll. And that is the idea behind I consider the difference between mobile first and essentially desktop first is with desktop first, content is clearly uh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's clearly grouped into priorities, but with mobile, it's looked at as more of a free flowing. It looks like it got designed like just for this mobile device, and it feels a lot more natural. It doesn't feel like it just got cut down from a huge website. The other type of big advantage here for mobile marketing is mobile targeting. That is the idea that you could walk into a store like Lowe's and actually get personalized recommendations based on um, where you are and products that might be on sale where you are, which also leads to the browser Bluetooth piece, which is, you have that a little Aruba Networks Square thing. That's essentially like a mini hotspot, except they're put all over a store, for example, and then they emit a signal to the cell phones around them, and then they can see where exactly different sections of the store exist. The same happens here with Target. I don't know if you've ever if you use the Target app, if you go to Target, but they have a really nice mobile browser Bluetooth experience. Now, it's important for you to both allow you for the app to use Bluetooth. You need to be actively using the app. There's some things that need to go right there, but the idea here with some of these is that you can essentially go along and buy products as you pick them up. Kroger does this really well, and actually Kroger still requires you to use their own little mobile device, but the idea there is that you can go along, you can put products in your cart, you can have a bag, you scan it, and then suddenly, you have your bags and you go through, you're all done. And then at the end, you have a card stored on file, you press payment, you're all set. It'll generate an electronic receipt for you, and you walk out without ever having to go through the checkout lines. That's like really, really impressive when you think about how busy grocery stores get, during the day on Saturdays and Sundays and some weeknights. And if you have a smaller shopping list, why not? I myself have only done it once, but really thought it was an interesting tool. So, but that's about it actually for chapter 12. Fairly straightforward. Not a ton going on there, and I think it might be the shortest chapter in the book. Chapter 13 might be a little shorter. But just a couple of other things on mobile to think about. One, first off, you look at a mobile user, and in general, these are going to be shorter, but yet more frequent usage sessions, which is why you have browser Bluetooth and a lot of push notifications that can occur. But then also, if you're doing a search for something like restaurants near me and you're on a phone, it's going to use geofencing to provide you the best location based strategy. So, those are just a couple of other quick quiz answers for you, just so you have them. But that's about it for now. Wrapping this up because I'm going a little over time. But, thanks for checking this out and best of luck with your ORM and mobile marketing efforts.